The screaming wind carried more than just snow that December morning. It carried the sound of desperation, barely audible above the howling mountain storm that had trapped Sarah Mitchell beneath 3 feet of unstable powder. Her designer ski jacket, now torn and crusted with ice, offered little protection against the brutal cold that was slowly claiming her consciousness. Every breath felt like swallowing razor blades, and the metallic taste of blood in her mouth reminded her that time was running out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miles away, threading his way down the treacherous mountain path with practiced ease, David Chen had no idea that his routine morning supply run would become the moment that changed everything. The weathered pickup truck lurched over another pothole, its chains biting into the ice-covered road as he navigated the winding descent from his isolated cabin. In the passenger seat, his 8-year-old daughter Emma pressed her face against the fogged window, her breath creating small clouds as she watched the snow-heavy pines blur past. "Dad, look how deep it is," Emma whispered, her voice filled with the wonder that only children possess when faced with nature's raw power. The snow had fallen for 3 straight days, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien and magnificent. Tree branches sagged under the weight of white blankets, and the entire world seemed muffled as if wrapped in cotton. David's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he felt the truck slide slightly on a particularly steep section. "Stay buckled, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had learned to navigate life's dangers with careful precision. The mountain had taught him respect through loss, and he never took its moods lightly. The avalanche had struck without warning, as they always do. Sarah had been skiing alone on what should have been a simple intermediate run when the mountain decided to reshape itself. The rumble had started as a whisper, growing into a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. She had perhaps 3 seconds to realize what was happening before the world turned white and violent, sweeping her down the mountainside like a leaf in a hurricane. Now trapped beneath the snow with only a small pocket of air keeping her alive, Sarah's mind raced through fragments of her life. The boardroom meetings where she had commanded respect through fear. The charity galas where she had written checks to ease her conscience. The empty penthouse apartment where she had celebrated her latest acquisition with expensive champagne. And no one to share it with. None of it seemed to matter now, buried beneath the weight of the mountain's indifference. David's life had been shaped by mountains too, though in a different way. Born and raised in the shadow of these peaks, he had learned their rhythms, their dangers, their gifts. His father had been a search and rescue coordinator, his grandfather a forest ranger. The mountain was in his blood, but it had also taken everything from him. 3 years ago, his wife Lisa had been caught in a sudden storm while hiking, her body found 2 days later by a team that included David himself. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had spent his life saving others from the mountain, only to have it claim the person he loved most. The grief had nearly destroyed him. For months after Lisa's funeral, he had stared at the mountains with hatred, blaming them for his loss. But Emma needed him, and gradually he had found his way back to a fragile peace. He had quit his job with the rescue service, unable to face the memories that every call-out triggered. Instead, he had taken work as a part-time handyman and odd-job worker, earning just enough to keep food on the table and heat in their small cabin. The cabin itself was a testament to resilience. Built by David's grandfather in the 1940s, it had weathered countless storms, its log walls growing stronger with age. It sat on a small clearing halfway up the mountain, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that became treacherous in winter. Most people would have called it isolated, but David found comfort in the solitude. Here, away from the pitying looks and well-meaning condolences, he could focus on what mattered, being the father Emma needed him to be. Emma had inherited her mother's curiosity and her father's quiet strength. At 8, she moved through the world with the confidence of a child who had been loved unconditionally, despite the tragedy that had reshaped their family. She attended the small mountain school via a daily bus ride that took 40 minutes each way, winding through valleys and over ridges. When the weather was too severe for the bus to run, David would drive her himself, sometimes camping in the school parking lot until the roads were safe enough for the return journey. Their morning routine had become a sacred ritual. David would wake before dawn to check the weather reports and road conditions. If the forecast looked manageable, they would share breakfast by the wood stove while Emma chattered about her plans for the day. She was working on a science project about local wildlife and had been pestering him to help her build a bird feeder. It was the kind of simple domestic happiness that David had never imagined he could find again after Lisa's death. The supply run to town was necessary, but always stressful. Their nearest neighbor was 8 miles away, and the closest grocery store was a 20-minute drive down winding mountain roads. David had learned to stock up on essentials whenever possible, but fresh food required regular trips. This morning, they needed milk, bread, and medicine for Emma's persistent cough. The pharmacist in town had become a friendly acquaintance, always asking about Emma's schoolwork and remembering David's preference for generic brands. As they descended the mountain, David's trained eye automatically scanned the slopes for signs of instability. The heavy snowfall had created dangerous conditions, and he could see where several small slides had already occurred. The snow had that particular quality that experienced mountaineers learn to recognize: dense, unstable, ready to move at the slightest provocation. He made a mental note to call the county road department about potential avalanche danger on the main highway. Sarah's situation was becoming desperate. The small air pocket that had initially given her hope was slowly filling with carbon dioxide. Her fingers, already numb from cold, were losing their ability to move. She had tried digging upward, but the snow was too heavy, too compacted. Each movement seemed to make her prison smaller, the walls closing in with relentless pressure. She thought about her assistant, probably wondering why she hadn't called in for her daily briefing. She thought about her mother, who lived across the country and whom she called once a month out of obligation rather than love. The strangest part was how quiet it was beneath the snow. No wind, no sound except her own labored breathing. It was like being wrapped in a suffocating blanket, cut off from the world above. She had read somewhere that avalanche victims often suffocated, not from lack of oxygen, but from carbon dioxide poisoning as they rebreathed their own exhaled air. The thought terrified her, but she couldn't stop herself from calculating how much time she might have left. David's pickup truck rounded a bend in the road, and suddenly he saw at a section of the slope above the highway where the snow had clearly moved. The debris field stretched across both lanes, a chaos of broken trees and compacted snow that spoke of tremendous force. He hit the brakes, his heart immediately racing as his rescue training kicked in. This wasn't just a slide. It was a major avalanche, and from the looks of it, it had happened recently. "Emma, stay in the truck," he said, his voice sharp with sudden urgency. He grabbed his emergency pack from behind the seat, a habit that had never left him despite his retirement from rescue work. Inside were a collapsible shovel, a probe, and a beacon detector tools he had hoped never to use again. "Dad, what's wrong?" Emma's voice was small, picking up on the change in his demeanor. "There's been an avalanche, sweetheart. I need to check if anyone was caught in it." He pulled on his heavy jacket and gloves, his movements efficient and practiced. "Lock the doors and keep the engine running. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, you drive to the ranger station and tell them what happened." Emma nodded solemnly, understanding that this was one of those moments when adult responsibilities took precedence over everything else. She had seen her father like this before, back when he still worked rescue, and she knew better than to argue. David stepped out into the bitter cold, immediately feeling the wind cut through his clothes. The snow was still falling, though less heavily than before, and the temperature was dropping fast. He activated his beacon detector and began moving across the debris field, looking for any sign of life beneath the snow. The detector remained silent, but that didn't mean there wasn't someone buried without a beacon. The avalanche had been massive, probably triggered by the weight of the new snow combined with wind loading on the upper slopes. The debris field was at least 200 yards wide and stretched down the mountainside for half a mile. If someone had been caught in this, their chances of survival were dropping with each passing minute. David moved methodically, using his probe to test the depth and consistency of the snow. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He looked for any signs of human presence, a piece of clothing, a ski, anything that might indicate someone had been swept down with the slide. The work was exhausting, each step requiring enormous effort in the deep, unstable snow. His breath came in sharp puffs of vapor, and he could feel his body heat rapidly dissipating. That's when he heard a faint sound that could have been wind, but wasn't. A voice, barely audible, calling for help. He stopped moving, straining his ears, and heard it again. Someone was alive under there. "Hello," he shouted, his voice carrying across the debris field. "Can you hear me? Keep making noise." The response was weak but unmistakable. "Help, please. Can't breathe." David's training took over completely. He began moving toward the sound, probing frantically with his avalanche probe. The voice seemed to be coming from near a partially buried pine tree, where the snow might have created a small air pocket. He worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that every second counted. "Keep talking," he called out. "I'm coming to get you." "Here. I'm here." The voice was getting weaker, but it gave him direction. David began digging with his shovel, throwing snow aside in a controlled frenzy. The person was deep, at least 4 feet down, and the snow was heavy and compacted. His shoulders burned with the effort, and sweat poured down his face despite the freezing temperature. He had done this dozens of times in his rescue career, but it never got easier. The race against time, the desperate hope, the knowledge that he might be too late. "What's your name?" he called out as he dug, trying to keep the person conscious and talking. Sarah Mitchell." The voice was barely a whisper now. "Sarah, I'm David. I'm going to get you out of there. Just keep breathing and stay with me." The name meant nothing to him, but it didn't matter. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who deserved to go home to her family. He dug deeper, his shovel hitting something solid. Not rock, something softer, clothing. "I can feel you, Sarah. I'm almost there." David cleared the snow away from what turned out to be a jacket sleeve. Working more carefully now, he exposed Sarah's arm, then her shoulder. She was on her side, curled in a fetal position, her face blue with cold and lack of oxygen. But she was alive, her eyes open and focused on him with desperate gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." David worked quickly to clear the snow from around her body, checking for injuries. She seemed to be intact, though severely hypothermic and exhausted. He pulled emergency blankets from his pack and wrapped them around her, then began the careful process of extricating her from the snow cave. "Can you move your fingers and toes?" he asked, supporting her as she sat up. Sarah tried to respond, but her body was shaking too violently from cold and shock. David realized she was going into hypothermia, and they needed to get her warm and to medical attention immediately. "I'm going to carry you to my truck," he said, slipping his arms under her knees and behind her back. "My daughter is there, and we'll get you to a hospital." Sarah tried to protest, but David was already lifting her, surprised by how light she felt. The expensive ski gear had done little to protect her from the mountain's fury, and her body felt fragile in his arms. He carried her across the debris field, each step carefully placed to avoid slipping on the unstable snow. Emma's eyes widened as she saw her father approaching with a woman in his arms. She immediately unlocked the truck doors and moved to the back seat, understanding without being told that the front seat was needed for the injured person. "Emma, there are more blankets in the emergency kit," David said as he gently placed Sarah in the passenger seat. "We need to get her warm." Emma quickly found the thermal blankets and helped her father wrap them around Sarah, who was still shivering uncontrollably. Her lips were blue, and her eyes had that glassy look that David recognized as a sign of severe hypothermia. "Is she going to be okay?" Emma asked quietly. "She's going to be fine," David replied, though he wasn't entirely sure. "We're going to take her to the hospital in town." He started the truck and turned the heat to maximum, then began the careful drive down the mountain. The road was treacherous, but his years of experience navigating these conditions served him well. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling incoherently. David kept talking to her, trying to keep her awake and responsive. "Sarah, can you tell me where you were skiing? Who were you with?" She tried to answer, but her words were slurred and disconnected. Something about being alone, about an important meeting, about needing to get back to the city. David focused on driving, but he wondered what had brought this woman to their mountain alone, and why she had been skiing by herself in such dangerous conditions. The hospital in Pine Ridge was small but well-equipped for mountain emergencies. The staff was experienced with hypothermia cases, and they quickly took Sarah into the emergency room. David filled out what paperwork he could, though he knew almost nothing about the woman he had pulled from the snow. Emma sat quietly beside him in the waiting room, occasionally looking up from her coloring book to ask if the lady was going to be okay. Dr. Martinez, the emergency room physician, emerged after an hour to give them an update. "She's stable," he said, his voice carrying the weary professionalism of someone who had seen too many mountain accidents. "Severe hypothermia, mild frostbite on her fingers and toes, but no major injuries. She was lucky you found her when you did." Another hour. And it would have been too late. David nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of relief and exhaustion that came after a successful rescue. "Can we see her?" "She's awake now, and she's been asking for you. She doesn't remember much about what happened, but she knows you saved her life." David and Emma were led to a small room where Sarah lay in a hospital bed, connected to monitors and warming blankets. She looked different than she had in the snow, younger, more vulnerable. Her dark hair was clean now, and her color had returned to normal. When she saw David, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice still hoarse, but much stronger. "The doctor said you saved my life." David felt uncomfortable with the gratitude, the same way he always had during his rescue career. "Anyone would have done the same thing," he said simply. "I'm just glad we found you in time." Sarah turned her attention to Emma, who was hanging back shyly behind her father. "And you must be Emma. Your dad told me you were very brave today." Emma stepped forward, suddenly finding her voice. "Are you feeling better? Dad said you were really cold." "I'm much better now, thanks to both of you." Sarah's smile was genuine, and David noticed how it transformed her face. "I'm going to be fine because your father is a hero." David shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not a hero. I just did what needed to be done." But Sarah was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "What you did today, it was extraordinary. You risked your life for a complete stranger." "That's what people do," David replied simply. "We help each other." Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying his face. She was beginning to remember fragments of her rescue, the sound of his voice calling to her through the snow, the feeling of strong arms lifting her to safety, the gentle way he had spoken to her during the drive to the hospital. But more than that, she was struck by his humility, his matter-of-fact acceptance of what he had done. Dr. Martinez returned to check on Sarah's condition. "We'll want to keep you overnight for observation," he said, reviewing her chart. "The hypothermia was severe, and we want to make sure there are no complications." Sarah nodded, but David could see the anxiety in her eyes. "Is there someone we can call for you? Family? Friends?" She hesitated, and David got the impression that the answer was more complicated than it should be. "My assistant. She'd be worried if I don't check in. But I don't want to alarm her. Where are you staying?" David asked. "We can help you get your things." "The Mountain View Resort," Sarah replied. "I was supposed to check out today, but obviously—" She gestured weakly at her hospital gown. David knew the resort. It was an expensive place that catered to wealthy tourists. The kind of place where a single night probably cost more than he made in a week. He wondered what Sarah did for a living, but it didn't really matter. What mattered was that she was safe. "I can drive up there and get your things," he offered. "If you give me your room number and ID, I can explain what happened." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "You would do that? But you've already done so much." "It's no trouble," David replied. "We were heading to town anyway." As they prepared to leave, Sarah reached out and gently touched David's arm. "I don't understand why you're being so kind to me. I'm a stranger, and you've already saved my life. You don't owe me anything else." David looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. "Maybe it's because I understand what it's like to be alone on this mountain. Maybe it's because I know how precious life is and how quickly it can be taken away. Or maybe it's just because it's the right thing to do." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. In her world, kindness always came with a price, always had an agenda. But this man, this quiet, humble man who had literally dug her out of the snow with his bare hands, seemed to expect nothing in return. It was a foreign concept to her, and it stirred something deep in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." David squeezed her hand gently. "Get some rest. We'll check on you tomorrow." As they left the hospital, Emma took her father's hand. "Dad, why was that lady skiing by herself? Didn't she have any friends with her?" David considered the question. "Some people prefer to be alone, sweetheart. But everyone needs help sometimes, even if they don't realize it." "She seemed sad," Emma observed with the intuitive wisdom of a child. "Not just hurt, but sad." David glanced back at the hospital, thinking about the woman they had left behind. Emma was right. There had been something beyond physical pain in Sarah's eyes. Something that spoke of a deeper kind of emptiness, the kind that couldn't be healed with warm blankets and medical care. The Mountain View Resort was everything David had expected and more. The lobby was all polished wood and stone, with a massive fireplace that crackled with artificial logs. The staff moved with the efficient politeness of people accustomed to serving wealthy guests, and David felt distinctly out of place in his worn work clothes and scuffed boots. The desk clerk, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a practiced smile, looked somewhat skeptical when David explained the situation. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't give out guest information or access rooms without proper authorization." David had expected this. He pulled out his phone and called the hospital, asking to speak to Sarah. After a brief conversation, he handed the phone to the clerk. "Yes, Ms. Mitchell, I understand. Of course we'll be happy to assist." The clerk's demeanor changed immediately upon hearing Sarah's voice. "Mr. Chen will be right up to collect your belongings." As they rode the elevator to the 5th floor, Emma pressed her face against the glass wall, marveling at the view of the mountain slopes below. "Dad, this place is fancy," she whispered. "It is," David agreed. feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the opulence around him. Remember what I've taught you about treating everyone with respect, no matter how much money they have or don't. Have, Emma nodded solemnly. Money doesn't make people good or bad. That's right. Sarah's room was a suite, larger than David's entire cabin. The bed was king-sized with what looked like Egyptian cotton sheets, and the bathroom had a marble countertop and a soaking tub. But what struck David most was how impersonal it all felt. There were no personal touches, no photos, no signs that anyone actually lived in this space. He packed Sarah's clothes efficiently, noting the designer labels and expensive fabrics. Everything was meticulously organized, as if she had been prepared to leave at a moment's notice. In the closet, he found several business suits and a laptop. Bag that looked like it cost more than his truck. Emma explored the suite with wide eyes, particularly fascinated by the bathroom amenities. "Dad, look at all these little bottles," she called out. "And there's a TV in the mirror." David smiled despite his discomfort. "Don't touch anything, sweetheart. We're just here to help." As he packed Sarah's belongings, David found himself trying to piece together who this woman was. The clothes were expensive but conservative, the kind worn by someone who needed to project authority and competence. There was a briefcase with business cards scattered inside, but he didn't feel right looking at them closely. What was clear was that Sarah Mitchell was successful, wealthy, and apparently traveling alone. The drive back to the hospital was quiet, with Emma dozing in the back seat and David lost in thought. He found himself thinking about the moment he had heard Sarah's voice calling for help beneath the snow. There had been something in that sound that had reached him on a level deeper than his rescue training. Desperation, yes, but also a kind of profound loneliness that he recognized from his own darkest moments after Lisa's death. At the hospital, they found Sarah awake and looking much better. Her color had returned to normal, and she was sitting up in bed, looking through what appeared to be work documents on a tablet. "You didn't have to do this," she said as David set her suitcase down. "The hotel could have sent someone." "It was no trouble," David replied. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. The doctor says I can leave tomorrow if my temperature stays stable." Sarah hesitated, then added, "I was hoping I could do something to thank you. Buy you dinner, or, I don't know, something to show my appreciation." David shook his head. "That's not necessary. I'm just glad you're okay." "Please," Sarah said, and there was something almost pleading in her voice. "I know it might sound strange, but I don't have anyone else to talk to about what happened today. My assistant is flying in tomorrow, but until then, I'd really appreciate the company." David studied her face, seeing past the polished exterior to the vulnerability beneath. "What about your family? Surely someone is worried about you." Sarah's expression darkened slightly. "My family and we're not close. I have a mother in Florida, but we only talk on holidays. No siblings, no significant other. It's just me and my work." Emma, who had been quietly coloring in the corner, looked up with concern. "Don't you have any friends?" Sarah's smile was sad. "I have business associates, colleagues, but friends, real friends, those are harder to come by in my line of work." David felt a familiar pang of sympathy. He recognized the isolation in her voice, the way she seemed to be holding herself apart from the world. "What do you do for work?" "I'm a corporate consultant," Sarah replied, which was technically true but vastly understated. "I help companies restructure, improve efficiency, that sort of thing. It requires a lot of travel, and it doesn't leave much time for personal relationships." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "That sounds lonely." Out of the mouths of babes, David thought. His daughter had identified what Sarah was trying so hard to hide, that beneath all the success and wealth, she was profoundly alone. "It can be," Sarah admitted, looking directly at Emma. "But I thought I was okay with that. I thought I had everything I needed." "What changed?" David asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the mountain. Peaks visible in the distance. I think almost dying gives you a different perspective on what's important. When I was trapped under that snow, all I could think about was how I would disappear, and no one would even know I was gone. My assistant would assume I was avoiding calls. My clients would find someone else to do their work, and eventually, everyone would just move on. David sat down in the chair beside her bed, Emma climbing up onto his lap. That's not true. Your life matters. What you do matters. Does it? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I spend my time helping rich people. Get richer. Companies become more efficient by firing people. I haven't done anything that actually makes the world better. You don't know that, David said firmly. Every life has value. Every person has the potential to make a difference. What happened today doesn't define your worth. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. Sarah looked at him with surprise. You really believe that? I have to. David replied. When my wife died, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see any point in continuing. But Emma needed me, and gradually I realized that even if I couldn't save Lisa, I could still save other people. That gave my life meaning again. You were a rescuer before today? David nodded. Search and rescue coordinator for 12 years. I retired after Lisa's accident, but I guess old habits die hard. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. This man had dedicated his life to saving others, had lost his wife to the very mountains he worked on, and yet he had still risked his life to save a complete stranger. I can't imagine having that kind of courage. It's not courage, David said simply. It's just love. Love for life, for people, for the idea that everyone deserves a chance to go home to their family. Emma looked up at Sarah with her clear, innocent eyes. Do you want to come have dinner with us? Dad makes really good spaghetti. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. This child, this beautiful, pure-hearted child, was offering her something that no amount of money could buy: genuine human connection. I would love that, she whispered. If it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, David said, and Sarah could tell he meant it. You'll have to come up to the cabin, though. I hope you don't mind rustic living. Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. After spending the afternoon buried in snow, I think I can handle rustic. As they prepared to leave the hospital the next morning, Sarah felt a nervousness she hadn't experienced in years. She was about to enter the real world of this man who had saved her life, and she had no idea what to expect. Her experience with men was limited to boardrooms and business dinners, carefully orchestrated interactions where everyone had an agenda. David Chen seemed to have no agenda at all, and that terrified her almost as much as it intrigued her. The drive up the mountain was breathtaking. Sarah had skied these slopes dozens of times, but she had never really seen them. She had always been focused on the challenge, the adrenaline, the conquest of the mountain. Now sitting in David's battered pickup truck with Emma chattering excitedly in the back seat, she saw the beauty. The way the morning light caught the snow crystals, turning them into diamonds. The majestic sweep of the pine forests. The absolute silence that seemed to emanate from the peaks themselves. It's so peaceful, she murmured, watching a hawk circle overhead. That's what I love about it, David replied. No matter what's happening in the world, the mountains remain constant. They put things in perspective. Emma leaned forward from the back seat. Dad, tell Sarah about the time you saw the mountain lion. David smiled, glancing at Sarah. Emma loves that story. I was checking on some equipment about 5 years ago, and I came around a bend in the trail, and there was this massive cougar just sitting there, watching me. We stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds, and then it just got up and walked away like it was saying, "This is my home, respect it." Were you scared? Sarah asked, terrified, David admitted, but also amazed. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. As they climbed higher, the trees grew thicker and the air became thinner. Sarah found herself breathing deeper, feeling her lungs expand with the clean mountain air. When was the last time she had been somewhere with air this pure, this free of pollution and stress? The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was perfect, a small log structure with a green metal roof, surrounded by towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and there was a well-worn path leading to the front door. It looked like something from a fairy tale, the kind of place where people lived simple, meaningful lives. "Home sweet home," David said, pulling into the small clearing that served as a driveway. Sarah stepped out of the truck and immediately felt the profound silence of the mountains. No traffic, no sirens, no constant hum of city life. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a bird. She stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the peace of it all. "It's wonderful," she said, and meant it. Emma bounded up the porch steps, eager to show off her home. "Come see my room." And Dad built the birdhouse by the window himself. The inside of the cabin was as charming as the outside. The main room was dominated by a wood-burning stove, with comfortable furniture arranged around it. The kitchen was small but efficient, with hand-painted tiles and copper pots hanging from hooks. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but it was clearly a home where people lived, not a showcase. Sarah noticed the photographs on the mantel pictures of David and Emma, and several that included a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Lisa, she realized, David's wife. The woman who had died in these mountains, leaving behind a husband and daughter who clearly adored her. "Mom always said the mountains were alive," Emma said, following Sarah's gaze. "She said they had feelings and moods, just like people." "She sounds like a wise woman," Sarah replied softly. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, having changed into fresh clothes. "She was. She taught me that the mountain gives and takes. But it always teaches. Today, it taught me that there are still people worth saving." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not sure I'm worth all this trouble. Everyone is worth saving," David said simply. "That's what Lisa would have said, and it's what I choose to believe." As David began preparing lunch, Sarah found herself drawn into the rhythm of the household. Emma showed her on the cabin, proudly displaying her artwork and her collection of interesting rocks. The child's enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in months. "Sarah, do you have any kids?" Emma asked as they looked through a photo album. "No, I don't," Sarah replied. "I never really thought about it. I was always too focused on work." "That's sad," Emma said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Kids are the best part of life. That's what Dad always says." Sarah glanced toward the kitchen, where David was humming as he cooked. There was something profoundly peaceful about watching him work, the way he moved with quiet efficiency, the care he took with even the simplest tasks. This was a man who found joy in ordinary moments, who had built a life around love rather than achievement. "Your dad is a very special man," Sarah said. "I know," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "He's the best dad in the world. But he gets lonely. Sometimes, I can tell." Sarah looked at the child with surprise. "What makes you say that?" Emma shrugged. "He looks at Mom's pictures when he thinks I'm not watching. And sometimes he sits on the porch at night and just stares at the mountains. He thinks I'm asleep, but I see him." The insight was startling. Sarah had assumed that David had found perfect peace in his simple life, but perhaps the contentment she observed was hard-won, built over years of grief and healing. Lunch was simple but delicious homemade soup and fresh bread, with mountain honey that David had traded for from a neighbor. They ate at the small kitchen table, Emma chattering about school and her friends, David asking Sarah questions about her travels and her work. "You must see a lot of interesting places," he said. "Do you enjoy the travel?" Sarah considered the question. "I used to think I did." I've been to every major city in the country, stayed in the best hotels, eaten at the finest restaurants. But sitting here, eating this meal, I realize I've never really experienced any of those places. I was always rushing from one meeting to the next, focused on the next deal, the next client. What kind of consulting do you do? David asked. Sarah hesitated, unsure how to explain her work without revealing too much about her wealth and status. I help companies restructure their operations, usually when they're struggling financially or need to improve efficiency. That sounds important, David said. Helping people save their businesses. Sarah felt a stab of guilt. Sometimes. But often what I do results in people losing their jobs. I make companies more profitable by making them more efficient, and efficiency usually means fewer employees. David was quiet for a moment, processing this information. That must be difficult, he said finally. Knowing that your work affects people's livelihoods. I used to tell myself it was just business, Sarah replied. That I was helping the greater good by making companies stronger. But lately, I've been wondering if that's just an excuse to avoid feeling guilty about the human cost. Emma looked up from her soup, her young face serious. Why don't you help people instead of companies? The question was so simple, so direct, that Sarah felt her breath catch. What do you mean? Well, if companies fire people and that makes you sad, why don't you help the people who get fired find new jobs? David smiled at his daughter's innocent wisdom. Emma has a point. There are always choices in how we use our talents. Sarah stared at the child, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, accumulating wealth and power, but she had never considered using those resources to actually help people. The idea was so foreign to her worldview that she struggled to process it. I never thought about it that way, she admitted. That's because you've been living in a different world, David said gently. A world where success is measured by money and power instead of by the lives you touch. But this world, Sarah gestured around the simple cabin, this is real. This matters. It took me a long time to understand that, David replied. After Lisa died, I thought my life was over because I couldn't save her. But Emma taught me that every day is a chance to save someone, even if it's just by making them smile or helping them feel less alone. Sarah looked at Emma, who was now concentrating on drawing a picture of the three of them having lunch. The child's unconscious acceptance of her presence, her easy affection, stirred something deep in Sarah's heart. When was the last time someone had been genuinely happy to see her, not because of what she could do for them, but simply because they enjoyed her company? Emma, she said softly, can I ask you something? Sure, Emma replied, not looking up from her drawing. Why are you being so nice to me? You don't know anything about me. Emma considered this seriously, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated. Because Dad saved you, and Dad only saves good people. Besides, you seem sad, and sad people need extra kindness. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This child, this beautiful, innocent child, had seen through all her defenses to the core of who she really was. Not the successful businesswoman, not the wealthy consultant, but simply a sad person who needed kindness. You're very wise, Sarah whispered. That's what Mom used to say, Emma replied, finally looking up with a grin. She said I got it from her. David watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and sadness. Emma had inherited Lisa's gift for seeing the good in people, for offering comfort without judgment. It was a precious quality, and one that Sarah clearly needed. After lunch, David suggested they take a walk around the property. The snow had stopped falling, and the afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Sarah borrowed a pair of Lisa's boots and a heavy coat, feeling strange wearing another woman's clothes but grateful for the warmth. The walk was peaceful, with Emma running ahead to show Sarah interesting rocks and trees while David pointed out various landmarks. They stopped at a small creek that wound through the property, its water dark and clear beneath a thin layer of ice. "This is where Emma learned to fish," David said, pointing to a deep pool beneath an overhanging pine. "Lisa spent hours here with her, teaching her to be patient and quiet. Do you miss her terribly?" Sarah asked, immediately regretting the personal question. David was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma throw pebbles into the water. "Every day," he said finally. "But I've learned that grief isn't just about missing someone. It's about honoring their memory by living the kind of life they would want you to live." "What kind of life would she want you to live?" "One filled with love and service," David replied without hesitation. "Lisa believed that we're all connected, that helping others is the highest calling we can have. She would want me to keep saving people, even if I'm not doing it professionally anymore." Sarah felt a stab of something she couldn't quite identify. Envy, perhaps, for the kind of love David and Lisa had shared, or regret for the life she had chosen instead of the one she might have had. "What about you?" David asked. "What kind of life do you want to live?" Sarah watched Emma building a small dam with sticks and stones, her face bright with concentration and joy. "I used to think I wanted power and success. But watching Emma, being here with you, I'm starting to think I want something else entirely." "What's that?" "Connection," Sarah said simply. "I want to matter to someone the way you matter to Emma. I want to wake up knowing that my life has purpose beyond making money." David studied her face, seeing the genuine longing there. "It's not too late to change course. You're young, you're obviously talented. You could do anything you set your mind to." "But I don't know how," Sarah admitted. "I've been living one way for so long. I don't know how to be different." "You start small," David said. "You make one choice, then another, until you've built a new life one decision at a time." Emma came running back to them, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "Dad, can Sarah stay for dinner too?" "Please?" David looked at Sarah, seeing the hope in her eyes. "Of course she can if she wants to." "I would love that," Sarah said, meaning it completely. As they walked back toward the cabin, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. Not because of what she owned or what she had achieved, but simply because she was welcomed into this small family circle with open arms. That evening, David cooked a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables while Sarah helped Emma with her homework. The child was working on a math problem, and Sarah found herself enjoying the challenge of explaining fractions in a way an 8-year-old could understand. "You're good at this," David observed, watching them work together at the kitchen table. "I never thought I would be," Sarah replied. "I've never spent much time around children." "You have good instincts," David sighed. "Emma doesn't warm up to everyone like this." Sarah felt a flush of pride. Emma's acceptance meant more to her than any business success she had ever achieved. Here was a child who judged her not by her wealth or status, but by her willingness to be present and kind. After dinner, they sat around the wood stove while David read to Emma from a book about mountain animals. Sarah found herself mesmerized by the gentle rhythm of his voice, the way Emma curled up against him with complete trust and contentment. This was what family looked like, she realized. Not the cold, formal interaction she had grown up with, but this warm, easy intimacy. "Sarah," Emma said sleepily, "will you come back and visit us?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "Would you like me to?" "Yes," Emma said firmly. "I think you need more friends, and we could be your friends." Sarah felt tears threaten. "Again, I would like that very much." As the evening wound down, David offered to drive Sarah back to her hotel, but she found herself reluctant to leave. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could be herself without pretense or performance. "I should go," she said finally. "You've done so much for me already." "It's no trouble," David replied. But you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like." Sarah looked around the cozy room, at Emma now asleep in her father's arms, at the simple contentment that filled this space. "I feel like I'm in a dream," she said softly. "Like I've stumbled into someone else's life." "Maybe you have," David said gently. "Maybe that's exactly what you needed." On the drive back to the hotel, Sarah stared out at the dark mountains, thinking about the day's events. 24 hours ago, she'd been a different person, driven, ambitious, isolated. Now she felt as though she had been given a glimpse of another way of living, another way of being in the world. "David," she said as they pulled into the hotel parking lot, "I want you to know that today changed something in me. I don't know what I'm going to do with that change yet, but I know it's important." David turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. "Change is always possible, Sarah. The question is whether you're brave enough to pursue it." "I think I might be," she replied. "For the first time in my life, I think I might be." As she walked into the opulent hotel lobby, Sarah felt the weight of her old life settling around her like a familiar but uncomfortable coat. Tomorrow, her assistant would arrive with reports and schedules and the endless demands of her business empire. But tonight, she would hold on to the memory of a simple cabin in the woods, a man who saved lives because it was the right thing to do, and a child who had shown her what unconditional acceptance looked like. She fell asleep that night thinking about Emma's question, "Why don't you help people instead of companies?" It was such a simple concept, yet it had never occurred to her. All her life, she had been focused on climbing higher, accumulating more, achieving greater success. But what if success meant something entirely different? What if it meant using her resources to lift others up instead of advancing her own position? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had built her entire identity around being powerful, untouchable, successful in the traditional sense. But David and Emma had shown her a different kind of power, the power of service, of love, of genuine human connection. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah made a decision. She didn't know exactly what it would look like yet, but she knew she wanted to find a way to help people instead of just helping companies maximize profit. She wanted to matter to someone the way David mattered to Emma. She wanted to build something that would outlast her, something that would make the world a little bit better. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the feeling of Emma's small hand in hers, and the way David had looked at her with such gentle understanding. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah Mitchell felt like she might actually be capable of love, both giving it and receiving it. And in that moment, buried beneath expensive sheets in a luxury hotel room, the woman who had everything realized that she had been living like she had nothing at all. Tomorrow she would begin the long journey of changing that. Tomorrow she would start building a life worth living. But tonight, she simply held on to the warmth of belonging, the memory of two people who had welcomed her into their family circle. Without question or condition, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The morning sun filtered through the hotel curtains, casting long shadows across Sarah's face as she slowly awakened. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, the events of the previous day feeling like fragments of a vivid dream. Then the memories came flooding back, the avalanche, the desperate cold, David's voice calling through the snow, Emma's bright smile, the warmth of the cabin that had felt more like home than anywhere she had lived in years. Sarah sat up in bed, her body still aching from the ordeal, and reached for her phone. 17 missed calls from her assistant, 43 unread emails, and a text message that simply read, "Where are you? Board meeting moved to tomorrow. Need to talk ASAP." The familiar weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy coat. But for the first time in her career, she felt reluctant to put it on. She showered slowly, thinking about Emma's innocent question, "Why don't you help people instead of companies?" The words had echoed in her mind all night, challenging everything she thought she knew about success and purpose. Sarah had built her empire by being ruthless, efficient, and emotionally detached. She had learned to see people as resources to be optimized, problems to be solved, obstacles to be overcome. But yesterday, she had been the one in need of rescue, and the man who had saved her had asked for nothing in return. The hotel phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Margaret from the front desk. There's a young girl here asking for you. She says her name is Emma." Sarah's heart jumped. "Emma? Is there an adult with her?" "Yes, ma'am. A gentleman who says he's her father. Shall I send them up?" "Please," Sarah said, surprising herself with how quickly she had responded. She had been dreading the arrival of her assistant, the return to her normal life of constant meetings and calculated decisions. But the thought of seeing David and Emma again filled her with genuine joy. Minutes later, there was a soft knock at her door. Sarah opened it to find Emma bouncing on her toes, holding a small wrapped package, while David stood behind her with a slightly apologetic expression. "We brought you something," Emma announced, thrusting the package into Sarah's hands. "Dad said we shouldn't bother you, but I wanted to make sure you were okay." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, touched by the child's concern. "You could never bother me. I'm so glad you came." She unwrapped the package to find a hand-carved wooden bird, painted in bright colors with careful detail. "Did you make this?" "Dad carved it, but I painted it," Emma said proudly. "It's a mountain bluebird. They're supposed to bring happiness." Sarah held the small carving carefully, feeling its smooth surface and admiring the delicate brushstrokes. "It's beautiful. Thank you both." David stepped forward, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "We also wanted to check on you before we headed into town. Make sure you're feeling better." "I'm fine," Sarah said, though she realized it was more than fine. Despite the physical exhaustion and the emotional upheaval of the past day, she felt more alive than she had in years. "Would you like to come in? I was just about to order breakfast." Emma's eyes lit up. "Can we, Dad? Please?" David hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the luxury of the hotel suite. "We don't want to impose. We just wanted to." "You're not imposing," Sarah said firmly. "After everything you've done for me, the least I can do is buy you breakfast." As they settled into the suite sitting area, Sarah found herself studying David and Emma with new eyes. Yesterday, she had been focused on survival, on the immediate kindness they had shown her. Today, she was beginning to see the deeper layers of their relationship, the way David anticipated Emma's needs without being asked, the way Emma trusted her father completely, the easy affection that flowed between them. "Dad," Emma said, settling onto the couch with her legs curled under her, "can we tell Sarah about the time you saved the lost hikers?" David looked embarrassed. "Emma, Sarah doesn't want to hear old rescue stories." "Actually, I do," Sarah said, surprising herself. "I'd like to know more about what you used to do." Emma launched into an animated account of one of David's rescues, her young voice filled with pride and excitement. As she spoke, Sarah watched David's face, seeing the mixture of pride and pain that crossed his features. It was clear that his work had meant everything to him, and equally clear that losing Lisa had changed everything. "Dad saved 43 people," Emma concluded. "He kept count on a board in his office, but he took it down after Mom died." "Emma," David said gently, "that's enough." But Sarah was fascinated. 43 people? "That's incredible," David shrugged. Uncomfortably, "It was my job. I had a good team, good equipment. We were just doing what we were trained to do." "But you loved it," Sarah observed. "I can see it in your eyes when Emma talks about it." David was quiet for a moment, staring out at the mountain view from the hotel window. "I did love it. There's something about being able to make a difference in the moment when it matters most. When someone's life is hanging in the balance, all the other stuff falls away." Politics, money, status, none of it matters. There's just the person who needs help and your ability to provide it. Sarah felt something stir in her chest. Why did you stop? After Lisa died, I couldn't face it anymore. Every call-out reminded me of what I'd lost. How could I save strangers when I couldn't save my own wife? David's voice was raw with old pain. I thought I was done with rescue work forever. But you saved me, Sarah said softly. That was different. That was just instinct. I heard someone calling for help, and I couldn't ignore it. Emma looked up from where she had been examining the hotel's expensive furnishings. Dad, maybe you're supposed to go back to saving people. Maybe that's why you found Sarah. David and Sarah exchanged a look over Emma's head. There was something profound in the child's simple observation, something that neither adult was quite ready to confront. Room service arrived with breakfast, and Sarah was struck by how differently David and Emma approached the luxury meal. They were appreciative but not overwhelmed, treating the expensive food with the same gratitude they would have shown a simple meal at home. It was a perspective Sarah had never encountered in her usual social circles, where luxury was expected and gratitude was rare. Sarah, Emma said, carefully cutting her pancakes, what are you going to do now? What do you mean? Well, you got hurt and Dad saved you, and now you're better. What happens next? Sarah realized she didn't have a good answer. Her assistant would arrive soon. There would be meetings and decisions and the endless machinery of her business empire. But for the first time in her career, none of that felt urgent or important. I'm not sure, she admitted. I have some work. Things to take care of, but after that, I don't know. You could stay here, Emma suggested. You could be our friend. David looked at his daughter with gentle correction. Emma, Sarah has her own life, her own responsibilities. She can't just stay here. But she could visit, Emma persisted. Couldn't you, Sarah? You could come. See us again. Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. I would like that very much. As they finished breakfast, David seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke up. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Yesterday, you said you help companies by making them more efficient, but you seemed troubled by that. Like it wasn't what you really wanted to be doing. Sarah set down her coffee cup, choosing her words carefully. It's complicated. I've been very successful at what I do, but lately I've been questioning whether success means the same thing to me that it used to. What changed? Sarah looked at Emma, who was now sitting on the floor drawing pictures of mountains and birds. I think I've been living in a world where everything is about winning and losing, about being stronger and smarter than everyone else. But yesterday, when I was trapped under that snow, none of that mattered. I wasn't thinking about my next deal or my profit margins. I was just thinking about how I didn't want to die alone. David nodded slowly. Fear has a way of stripping away everything non-essential. Exactly. And when you pulled me out of that snow, when you brought me to your home and shared your family with me, I experienced something I'd forgotten existed. Kindness without agenda, help without expectation of return. That's just how people should treat each other, David said simply. But it's not how people in my world treat each other, Sarah replied. Everything is transactional. Every relationship is about what you can get from the other person. Emma looked up from her drawing. That sounds lonely. It is lonely, Sarah admitted. Very lonely. David studied her face, seeing the vulnerability she was trying to hide. What would you do if you could do anything? If money wasn't a factor? If you could start over completely? Sarah considered the question seriously. I think I'd want to help people. Really help them, not just help companies become more profitable. I'd want to use my resources to make life better for people who are struggling. Like who? I don't know. Families who can't afford medical care. Single parents who are working multiple jobs and still can't make ends meet. People who've lost their jobs and don't know how to start over. Sarah paused, thinking. People. Like you, actually. People who have dedicated their lives to helping others, but don't have the resources to do it effectively. Emma had stopped drawing and was listening intently. You could help Dad go back to saving people. Emma, David said quickly, that's not how it works. But Sarah was looking at David with new interest. Actually, Emma might be onto something. What would it take for you to go back to rescue work? David shook his head. It's not that simple. I'd need training updates, new equipment, certification renewals. And there's Emma to consider. I can't take the same risks I used to take. But what if you could do it differently? What if you could help people without putting yourself in danger? I don't follow. Sarah was beginning to form an idea. Something that excited her more than any business deal she had ever contemplated. What if you could train other people to do what you do? What if you could create a program that taught rescue techniques to volunteers or helped fund better equipment for existing rescue teams? David looked skeptical. That takes money. A lot of money. I have money, Sarah said simply. More. Money that I know what to do with. The room fell silent. David stared at Sarah, trying to process what she was suggesting. Emma looked back and forth between them, sensing the importance of the moment, even if she didn't fully understand it. Sarah, David said carefully, I appreciate the thought, but you don't owe me anything. You don't need to. This isn't about owing you, Sarah interrupted. This is about finding a way to use my resources for something that actually matters. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you showed me what it looks like to live with purpose. Before David could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Sarah's expression immediately changed, her face hardening into the professional mask she wore in her business life. That's my assistant, she said, getting up to answer the door. I'm sorry, but we should go, David said, standing up and helping Emma gather her things. Thank you for breakfast. Sarah opened the door to find Catherine Wells, her assistant, standing in the hallway with a briefcase and a tablet, looking every inch the efficient professional she was hired to be. Ms. Mitchell, Catherine said, her voice crisp with barely controlled frustration. I've been trying to reach you for over 24 hours. The Hartford Industries merger is in jeopardy. The board is demanding answers about the Peterson layoffs. And you have a conference call with the Japanese investors in 30 minutes. Sarah felt the familiar weight of her responsibilities settling back onto her shoulders. Catherine, I'd like you to meet David Chen and his daughter Emma. They're friends. Catherine's eyes flicked over David and Emma, taking in their simple clothes and modest demeanor. Her expression was polite but dismissive. How nice, Mr. Chen. If you'll excuse us, Ms. Mitchell and I have urgent business to discuss. David nodded, understanding the dismissal. Of course. Sarah, thank you again for breakfast. As David and Emma prepared to leave, Sarah felt a desperate urge to stop them, to hold on to the peace and purpose she had found in their presence. But Catherine was already opening her briefcase, pulling out reports and contracts that demanded immediate attention. Sarah, Emma said, running back to give her a hug. Don't forget about us, okay? I won't, Sarah promised, holding the child tightly. I could never forget about you. After they left, Catherine immediately launched into a rapid-fire briefing about the crises that had developed in Sarah's absence. But Sarah found herself struggling to focus, her mind drifting back to the conversation. About rescue work and helping people. Ms. Mitchell? Catherine said sharply, Are you listening? The Hartford merger is worth $300 million. We can't afford to lose it. Sarah looked at her assistant, this woman who had worked for her for 5 years, who knew her schedule better than she did, who had never once asked her how she was feeling or what she wanted out of life. Catherine, Sarah said slowly, do you ever think about whether the work we do actually makes the world better? Catherine looked confused. I'm sorry? The companies we help, the deals we make, the people who lose their jobs when we make operations more efficient. Do you ever wonder if we're doing more harm than good? Catherine's expression was carefully neutral. Ms. Mitchell, I think you might be suffering from some delayed shock from your accident. Perhaps we should postpone the more important meetings until you're feeling better. I'm feeling fine, Sarah said firmly. In fact, I'm feeling clearer than I have in years. But even as she said it, Sarah felt the familiar patterns of her old life pulling her back in. The phone calls, the meetings, the constant pressure to make decisions that affected thousands of people she would never meet. By the time Catherine had finished her briefing, Sarah felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical injury. The conference call with the Japanese investors was a disaster. Sarah found herself distracted, giving vague answers to specific questions, her mind wandering to thoughts of David and Emma and the simple clarity of their life in the mountains. The investors noticed her lack of focus immediately, expressing concern about her commitment to the deal. Ms. Mitchell, said Mr. Yamamoto, the lead investor, you seem distracted today. Perhaps we should reschedule when you're feeling more present. After the call ended, Catherine confronted Sarah directly. What's going on with you? You've never been unfocused like this before. The investors are nervous, the board is asking questions, and you're acting like none of it matters. Maybe it doesn't matter, Sarah said quietly. What do you mean? Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had nearly claimed her life and had somehow given her a new one. Catherine, how many people do you think have lost their jobs because of recommendations I've made? That's not how we measure success, Catherine replied. We measure success by increased profitability, improved efficiency, stronger market position. But how many people? Sarah pressed. Thousands? Tens of thousands? Catherine looked uncomfortable. The people we help companies let go usually find other jobs. It's just part of the natural business cycle. Do they? Do we know that? Do we follow up to see what happens to the families affected by our recommendations? Ms. Mitchell, you're talking about completely changing how we do business. Our clients hire us because we're willing to make the tough decisions they can't make themselves. Sarah turned away from the window to face her assistant. What if I don't want to make those decisions anymore? What if I want to help people instead of helping companies maximize profit? Catherine stared at her for a long moment. I think you need to take some time off. This accident has clearly affected you more than you realize. You're right, Sarah said. It has affected me. It's made me realize that I've been living a life that doesn't align with my values. You don't have values, Catherine said bluntly. You have business objectives. That's what's made you successful. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, partly because they were true. She had spent so many years focused on success that she had forgotten what she actually cared about. But yesterday, holding Emma and listening to David talk about his rescue work, she had remembered what it felt like to have values beyond profit margins. I need to think, Sarah said finally. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. Ms. Mitchell, you can't just cancel. Cancel them, Sarah repeated firmly. I'll deal with the consequences tomorrow. After Catherine left, clearly frustrated and confused, Sarah sat alone in her hotel suite, staring at the wooden bird Emma had given her. Such a simple gift, made with love and care, worth more to her than any expensive present she had ever received. She thought about David's question, what would you do if you could do anything? The answer had come to her so clearly in that moment, she wanted to help people. But now, surrounded by the trappings of her old life, the idea seemed impossible. Impractical, naive. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for breakfast. Emma wanted me to tell you she's drawing you a picture of a mountain bluebird. Hope your meetings go well. Sarah stared at the message, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with business success or professional achievement. These people, this man and his daughter, had opened their hearts to her without asking for anything in return. They had shown her what it meant to live with purpose, to find meaning in service to others. She picked up her phone and dialed Catherine's number. "Catherine, I need you to research something for me." "What kind of research?" "I want to know everything about mountain rescue operations. Funding sources, training requirements, equipment needs, volunteer programs, everything." "Ms. Mitchell, that's completely outside our area of expertise." "Then find someone whose area of expertise it is. I want a complete report by tomorrow morning." "May I ask what this is for?" Sarah looked out at the mountains again, thinking about David's 43 rescues, about the lives he had saved and the life he had given up after losing Lisa. "I'm exploring a new investment opportunity." "In mountain rescue?" "In people," Sarah said simply. "I'm investing in people." After she hung up, Sarah made another decision. She called the hotel concierge and asked for directions to the nearest outdoor equipment store. If she was going to understand David's world, she needed to start learning about it. The store was a revelation. Sarah had never paid attention to the technical gear required for mountain rescue work, the specialized ropes and harnesses, the avalanche beacons and probes, the communication equipment and medical supplies. Everything was expensive, and most of it had to be replaced regularly to maintain safety standards. "Can I help you find something?" asked a young employee with weathered hands and kind eyes. "I'm trying to understand what it takes to do mountain rescue work," Sarah said. "The equipment, the training, the costs." The employee's face lit up. "Are you thinking about joining a rescue team? That's awesome. We don't get enough volunteers." "Not exactly," Sarah said. "I'm more interested in the funding side. How do rescue teams pay for all this equipment?" The employee's expression became more serious. "That's the biggest challenge we face. Most rescue teams are volunteer organizations that depend on donations and grants. But the equipment is expensive, and it's literally life or death stuff. You can't cut corners." "How much would it cost to fully equip a rescue team?" "For a basic team of 20 volunteers? Probably around $200,000 for initial equipment, and then about $50,000 a year for maintenance and replacements." Sarah nodded, making mental notes. $200,000 was less than she spent on her apartment renovation last year. "What about training? That's another huge expense." "Basic rescue certification takes about 6 months and costs around $5,000 per person. Advanced training can cost twice that." As Sarah walked through the store, looking at the gear and talking to the employees, she felt a growing excitement. This was concrete, practical, achievable. She could fund equipment and training for rescue teams. She could help people like David get back to the work they loved. But more than that, she could create something that would outlast her, something that would save lives long after she was gone. It was the kind of legacy she had never thought to want, but now seemed like the only thing that mattered. Her phone rang as she was examining a particularly sophisticated piece of rescue equipment. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and Sarah felt a familiar sense of dread. "Hello, Mother." "Sarah, darling, I just heard about your accident. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mother. Just a skiing mishap." "Well, you should be more careful. At your age, you can't afford to take unnecessary risks." Sarah almost laughed. Her mother had no idea what an unnecessary risk really was. "I'm actually thinking about taking some different kinds of risks." "What do you mean?" "I'm thinking about changing my business focus. Maybe doing something more meaningful." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, you've built a very successful company. Don't let a little accident make you do something foolish." "What if helping people isn't foolish? What if it's the smartest thing I've ever done?" "Helping people is fine as a hobby, dear. But you can't build a career on it." Sarah thought about David, who had built his entire life around helping people. "Actually, Mother, I think you can." After she hung up, Sarah realized that her mother's disapproval didn't hurt the way it used to. For the first time in her life, she was more interested in Emma's opinion than in her mother's approval. That evening, Sarah drove back up the mountain to David's cabin. She had told herself she was just returning Emma's drawing supplies that had been left in the hotel room. But she knew the real reason. She needed to see them again, to hold on to the feeling of purpose she had discovered in their presence. The cabin looked even more welcoming in the evening light, with warm golden light spilling from the windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Sarah could hear Emma's laughter from inside, and the sound filled her with a joy she hadn't experienced in years. David answered the door with surprise and pleasure. "Sarah, what brings you back up here?" "I brought Emma's crayons," Sarah said, holding up the small box. "She left them at the hotel." "You didn't have to drive all the way up here for that," David said, but his smile suggested he was glad she had. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. About what we discussed this morning." David's expression became more serious. "Come in. Emma's been asking about you all day." Emma rushed to greet Sarah with a hug, immediately launching into an excited account of her day at school. As they settled around the kitchen table, Sarah felt the same sense of peace she had experienced the night before. This was what home felt like, she realized. Not the expensive apartment in the city, but this simple cabin filled with love and laughter. "David," Sarah said after Emma had finished her story, "I've been thinking about what you said. About training people to do rescue work. Sarah, I told you that's not necessary." "Let me finish," she said gently. "I spent today researching mountain rescue operations. I learned about the equipment costs, the training requirements, the funding challenges. And I realized something." David waited, his expression cautious. "I realized that I have the resources to make a real difference in this field. Not just funding one rescue team, but creating a foundation that could support rescue operations across the entire region." Emma looked up from her coloring book with interest. "What's a foundation?" "It's like a big piggy bank that helps people do important work," Sarah explained. "In this case, it would help rescue teams get the equipment and training they need to save lives." David shook his head. "Sarah, that's incredibly generous, but I can't let you do that. You barely know me." "This isn't about you," Sarah said firmly. "This is about me finding a way to use my wealth for something that actually matters. You showed me what it looks like to live with purpose. Now I want to find my own purpose." "But why rescue work specifically?" Sarah thought about the question. "Because when I was trapped under that snow, I experienced what it means to be truly helpless. And I experienced what it means to be saved by someone who cares about human life more than anything else. I want to make sure that other people get that same chance." Emma had stopped coloring and was listening intently. "So you want to help Dad save more people?" "I want to help lots of people save lots of people," Sarah replied. "Your dad could help train them, help them be as good at rescue work as he is." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I don't know if I'm ready to go back to that world. What if you could do it differently? What if you could train others without having to do the dangerous rescues yourself? I still don't understand why you want to do this." Sarah looked at Emma, who was watching the conversation with bright, curious eyes. "Because yesterday I was saved by someone who asked for nothing in return. Today I want to find a way to pay that forward." "But you could pay it forward in lots of ways. You could donate to hospitals or schools, or—" "I could," Sarah agreed. "But this feels right. This feels like something I'm meant to do." David studied her face, seeing the sincerity there. "You're serious about this?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Emma suddenly spoke up. "Dad, remember what Mom used to say? About how the mountain gives and takes, but always teaches." David's expression softened. "I remember. Maybe the mountain taught Sarah something too. Maybe it taught her how to help people." David looked at his daughter with wonder. At 8 years old, Emma had a wisdom that continually amazed him. "What do you think, sweetheart? Should we help Sarah learn about rescue work?" Emma grinned. "I think we should. But first, she needs to learn how to make hot chocolate the right way." As Emma bustled around the kitchen, preparing what she insisted was the perfect hot chocolate, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in her adult life, she was part of something bigger than herself. Not a business deal or a profit margin, but a family, a community, a shared purpose. "Sarah," David said quietly, "if you're really serious about this foundation idea, I know some people you should meet." "What kind of people?" "Rescue coordinators, volunteer team leaders, people who've been doing this work for years. They could tell you what the real needs are, where funding would make the biggest difference." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement. "You'd help me with this?" "I'd help you understand the field," David said carefully. "Whether or not I get personally involved again, that's something I need to think about." "That's all I'm asking for," Sarah said. "Help me understand how to make a difference." As they sat around the kitchen table, drinking Emma's perfect hot chocolate and planning Sarah's introduction to the world of mountain rescue, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what she was meant to do with her life, with her resources, with her second chance. The wooden bluebird Emma had given her sat on the table between them, its bright colors catching the lamplight. "A symbol of happiness," Emma had said. Sarah realized that for the first time in her adult life, she understood what happiness actually meant. It wasn't about achievement or accumulation or being better than everyone else. It was about connection, about purpose, about using your gifts to make life better for others. It was about finding a family that chose you back, about building something that would outlast you, about saving lives instead of just making money. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave. Catherine would be calling soon, with updates on the business crises that had seemed so urgent that morning. But sitting here in this simple cabin, surrounded by love and laughter and the possibility of meaningful work, those crises felt like echoes from another life. "Sarah," Emma said as she prepared to leave, "tomorrow is Saturday. Do you want to go hiking with us? Dad knows all the best trails." Sarah looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd love that," she said, "but I should warn you, I'm not much of a hiker." "That's okay," Emma said confidently. "Dad's really good at helping people who are lost." As Sarah drove back down the mountain, she realized that Emma was right. She had been lost for years, wandering through a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt empty on the inside. David and Emma had helped her find her way back to something real, something that mattered. Tomorrow she would start the process of building her foundation. She would meet with rescue coordinators and volunteer team leaders. She would learn about the real needs and challenges facing mountain rescue operations. And she would begin the work of transforming her resources into something that could save lives. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had been saved by kindness and who wanted to pass that kindness on to others. A woman who had found a family in the most unexpected place and a purpose in the most unlikely circumstances. The mountain had given and taken, as Emma said it always did. But most importantly, it had taught her what it meant to be truly alive. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's accident, and the rhythm of her new life had begun to take shape in ways she had never imagined possible. Each morning, she would wake in her hotel suite to the sound of her phone buzzing with urgent messages from Catherine, and each morning she would set the phone aside and instead look out at the mountains that had changed everything. The foundation was becoming real. Sarah had met with lawyers, accountants, and nonprofit specialists, working to establish the Mountain Guardian Foundation with a mission that seemed to grow clearer each day: to provide funding, training, and equipment to volunteer rescue teams throughout the region. What had started as a simple desire to help David return to his calling had evolved into something much larger. Sarah had also begun spending her days differently. Instead of conference calls and merger negotiations, she found herself driving up winding mountain roads to meet with rescue coordinators and volunteer team leaders. She had visited fire stations and ranger outposts, listening to stories of dramatic rescues and heartbreaking losses. Each conversation had reinforced her conviction that this work mattered in ways her corporate consulting never had. The morning sun was painting the peaks gold when Sarah's phone rang. She had been expecting Catherine's daily crisis report, but the caller ID showed David's number instead. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so early." David's voice was tense with an urgency she had never heard before. "We have a situation." Sarah immediately sat up straighter. "What's wrong?" "There's been a major incident on Devil's Peak. A climbing party got caught in an unexpected storm last night. 3 people are missing, and the weather's too severe for helicopter evacuation. Are you going?" David was quiet for a moment. "They called me, the ranger station, the sheriff's department. They're asking for volunteers with experience." Sarah could hear the conflict in his voice. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd think about it." "But Sarah, I haven't done this kind of work in 3 years. I don't know if I'm ready." "What do you need?" Sarah asked immediately. "I need to know that if something happens to me, Emma will be taken care of. I need to know that she won't be alone." The request hit Sarah like a physical blow. David was asking her to be there for Emma, to be family in the way that mattered most. "Of course," she said without hesitation. "I'll be there for her no matter what." "Thank you," David said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "I'm going to say yes." By the time Sarah reached the ranger station, it was bustling with activity. Rescue coordinators were studying weather maps and topographical charts, while volunteers checked equipment and prepared for what looked like a dangerous operation. The missing climbers were experienced, but they had been caught in a sudden storm that had dropped temperatures to dangerous levels and created whiteout conditions. David was already there, suited up in rescue gear that looked well used but carefully maintained. Sarah barely recognized him. Gone was the gentle single father she had grown to know, replaced by a focused professional who moved with the efficient precision of someone who had done this countless times before. "Sarah," he said when he saw her, "you didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," she replied. "Emma's at school, but I wanted to be here, to help somehow." David looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "This isn't like the movies. Real rescues are dangerous, unpredictable. People get hurt. People die." "I know," Sarah said. "But people also get saved. And you're one of the best at making that happen." The rescue coordinator, a weathered woman named Captain Rodriguez, approached them with a grim expression. "David, I can't tell you how glad I am that you're willing to do this. We've got 3 missing climbers, last known position about 2,000 feet up the north face. Weather's expected to get worse before it gets better. What's the plan?" David asked, immediately shifting into professional mode. "We're sending 3 teams up different routes. You'll be leading Team Alpha, taking the most direct path. It's the most dangerous approach, but also the most likely to reach them quickly." Sarah watched David process this information, seeing the calculation in his eyes as he weighed risks and possibilities. This was a different side of him, one that reminded her of her own corporate persona, focused, decisive, willing to take calculated risks for the greater good. "I'll need Jake Morrison and Chris Chen on my team," David said. "They know the terrain, and they're both certified in advanced medical response." "Done," Rodriguez replied. "You leave in 20 minutes. As the rescue team made final preparations, Sarah found herself feeling helpless in a way she hadn't experienced since being trapped under the avalanche. She was used to being in control, to being able to solve problems through determination and resources. But here, in the face of nature's indifference and human limitation, All she could do was watch and wait. David approached her one final time before leaving. "Sarah, if something happens, nothing's going to happen," she said firmly. "You're going to bring those people home, and then you're going to come back to Emma. But if something does happen, I need you to know that these past few weeks have meant everything to me. You've reminded me of who I used to be, of what I'm capable, of when I'm not paralyzed by fear." Sarah felt tears threatening. "David, don't talk like that. You're coming back." "I'm planning to," he said with a slight smile. "But if I don't, will you tell Emma that I love her more than the mountains love the sky? You'll tell her yourself." Sarah said, but she nodded to show she understood. As the rescue teams departed, Sarah found herself in an unfamiliar position waiting. She had brought her laptop, thinking she might catch up on work, but the reports and emails that had once seemed so urgent now felt completely irrelevant. Instead, she found herself pacing the ranger station, checking weather updates and learning more about mountain rescue operations than she had ever thought possible. Captain Rodriguez, noticing her anxiety, approached with 2 cups of coffee. "You care about him." "He saved my life," Sarah replied, "and he's become important too." "Me? He's a good man," Rodriguez said. "One of the best rescue coordinators I've ever worked with. When his wife died, we all thought we'd lost him forever." "What happened exactly?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, clearly debating how much to share. "Lisa was hiking alone on what should have been a simple trail. Flash flood came out of nowhere. Creek turned into a raging torrent in minutes. David was part of the search team that found her." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "He had to recover his own wife's body. He insisted on it. Said it was his responsibility as her husband and as a rescue coordinator, but it broke something in him. He quit the next day and never looked back." Sarah began to understand the magnitude of what David was doing today. He wasn't just risking his life for strangers. He was confronting the very mountains that had taken his wife, the same work that had failed to save the person he loved most. "Why did he agree to go today?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez smiled slightly. "I think you know the answer to that." As the hours passed, Sarah found herself becoming part of the rescue operation in unexpected ways. She helped coordinate communications between the base station and the teams in the field, used her business skills to organize supplies and equipment, and even found herself making sandwiches for the support crew. It was the first time in her professional life that she had done manual labor, and she discovered that there was something deeply satisfying about work that had immediate, tangible results. The radio crackled to life around noon. "Base, this is Team Alpha. We've located the missing climbers." Sarah's heart jumped. "David's team?" Rodriguez nodded, picking up the radio. "Team Alpha, this is Base. What's your status?" "We have 3 victims. 2 are hypothermic but conscious. One has what appears to be a severe leg fracture and is showing signs of shock." "Can you extract them?" There was a pause that seemed to last forever. "Weather's getting worse up here. We're going to need to shelter in place until the storm passes." Rodriguez exchanged a look with Sarah. "How long?" "Could be hours. Could be overnight." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The idea of David and his team trapped on the mountain, exposed to the storm, brought back vivid memories of her own experience under the avalanche. But this time, she wasn't the one being rescued. She was the one waiting, hoping, praying that the people she cared about would make it home safely. "Is there anything we can do?" Sarah asked. "We wait," Rodriguez replied, "and we hope." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about Emma. The little girl was in school, unaware that her father was risking his life on the mountain. Sarah had promised to pick her up at 3 o'clock, to be there for her, no matter what happened. It was a responsibility she had never taken on before, and the weight of it was both terrifying and strangely comforting. The school pickup was surreal. Sarah stood among the other parents, feeling like an imposter in her expensive clothes and carefully styled hair. When Emma spotted her, the child's face lit up with joy. "Sarah, where's Dad?" "He's helping some people who got lost on the mountain," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He asked me to pick you up today." Emma's expression immediately became serious. "Is he doing rescue work again?" "Yes, sweetheart, he is. Is he going to be okay?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, looking into the child's worried eyes. "Your dad is very good at what he does. He's going to do everything he can to help those people and come home safely." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mom always said that Dad was a hero, but heroes have to be careful because other people need them." The wisdom in the child's words struck Sarah deeply. Emma understood, in her innocent way, the weight of responsibility that came with David's calling. She knew that her father's work was important, but she also knew that it was dangerous. They drove back to the ranger station together, Emma insisting that she wanted to wait for her father there. Sarah tried to distract her with homework and drawing, but the child's attention kept drifting to the radio communications and the worried faces of the rescue coordinators. "Sarah," Emma said during a quiet moment, "what if Dad doesn't come back?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. "He's going to come back, Emma. I know he is. But what if he doesn't? What would happen to me?" Sarah pulled the child close, feeling the responsibility of her promise to David. "If anything happened to your dad, I would take care of you. I would make sure you were safe and loved." Emma looked up at her with serious eyes. "Do you promise?" "I promise," Sarah said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As evening approached, the weather continued to deteriorate. The rescue teams were reporting wind speeds that made movement impossible and visibility that was measured in feet rather than miles. Sarah found herself checking the clock obsessively, calculating how long David had been on the mountain, how long he could survive in such conditions. Catherine called repeatedly, each time with increasingly urgent messages about business crises that needed immediate attention. But Sarah found herself unable to care about stock prices and merger negotiations. When David's life was in danger, she had Catherine reschedule everything, cancel meetings, and handle whatever crises she could without Sarah's direct involvement. "Ms. Mitchell," Catherine said during one particularly heated phone call, "I understand you're worried about your friend, but you have responsibilities. The Peterson Industries deal is falling apart without your input." "Then let it fall apart," Sarah said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "You can't be serious. This deal is worth $50 million, and David's life is worth more than that." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Ms. Mitchell, I think you need to seriously consider whether you're making decisions based on sound business judgment or emotional attachment." Sarah looked at Emma, who was curled up on a chair drawing pictures of mountain rescues with happy endings. "I'm making decisions based on what actually matters, Catherine. And right now, what matters is the people I care about." Around 8 o'clock, Emma fell asleep in Sarah's arms, exhausted by the emotional strain of the day. Sarah held her close, marveling at the trust the child had placed in her. She thought about her own childhood, the emotional distance she had maintained from her parents, the way she had learned to rely only on herself. But Emma's easy affection, her willingness to be vulnerable, had shown Sarah a different way of living. The radio crackled to life just after 9 o'clock. "Base, this is Team Alpha." Rodriguez immediately responded. "Team Alpha, this is Base. What's your status?" "We're beginning descent with all 3 victims. Weather's cleared enough for us to move safely." Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. "They're okay?" "Sounds like it," Rodriguez replied with a grin. "David's team is bringing everyone home." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as the rescue teams made their way down the mountain. Sarah gently woke Emma, who immediately perked up at the news that her father was safe. Together, they waited outside the ranger station, watching. the road for signs of the returning rescue vehicles. When David finally appeared, he looked exhausted but triumphant. His face was windburned and his clothes were soaked through, but he was walking under his own power and wearing the expression of a man who had just remembered what he was capable of. Emma ran to him immediately, throwing her arms around his waist. "Dad, you're okay." "I'm okay, sweetheart," David said, lifting her up and holding her close. "I'm so sorry I worried you." "I knew you'd come back," Emma said with the absolute faith of a child. "Sarah said you would." David looked at Sarah over Emma's head, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you for being here for her. Thank you for coming back," Sarah replied. As they drove back to the cabin, Emma chattering excitedly about her day at the ranger station, David was unusually quiet. Sarah sensed that something had shifted during his time on the mountain, but she didn't want to push him to talk about it. "How are the climbers?" she asked instead. "They'll be fine," David replied. "Hypothermia, some frostbite, one broken leg. But they're alive, and that's what matters." "How do you feel about being back in the field?" David was quiet for a moment. "Scared, exhilarated, guilty, proud, all at the same time." "Guilty?" "For leaving it for so long. For letting fear keep me from doing work that I love, work that saves lives." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "You weren't ready before. You're ready now." "Am I?" David asked. "Or am I just running toward danger because I'm tired of running away from it?" Emma looked up from the back seat. "Dad, you saved those people today, didn't you?" "My team saved them," David corrected. "I just helped." "That's what heroes do," Emma said matter-of-factly. "They help people." David smiled at his daughter's simple wisdom. "When did you get so smart?" "Mom always said I got it from you." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, David and Sarah sat on the porch looking out at the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystal-clear sky filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I've been thinking about your foundation idea," David said suddenly. Sarah turned to look at him. "And I think it could work. Not just the funding and equipment, but the training programs. I think we could create something that would save a lot of lives." "We?" David met her eyes. "I want to be part of it. I want to help train the next generation of rescue coordinators. I want to share what I've learned so that other people can do what we did today." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. "You mean it?" "I mean it. Today reminded me that this work isn't just about the adrenaline or the danger. It's about using your skills to give people a second chance at life, like you gave me a second chance." "I didn't give you anything," Sarah protested. "You already had everything you needed." "I had the skills," David agreed. "But I had lost the courage to use them. You helped me remember why this work matters." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "So we're really going to do this? Build something together?" "I think we already have," David said softly. "We've built a family. Now we're going to build something that will help other families stay together." As they sat together in the mountain silence, Sarah realized that her transformation was complete. The woman who had been trapped under the avalanche focused on profit, isolated from meaningful connection, measuring success by accumulation, was gone. In her place was someone who understood that the most important things in life couldn't be bought or sold, only shared. "David," she said quietly, "I love you." The words surprised them both. Sarah had never said them lightly, and she had never meant them more completely. David turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment I pulled you out of that snow." "What took you so long to tell me?" "I was scared," David admitted. "Scared of loving someone again, scared of losing someone again. But today, when I was on that mountain, I realized that fear is just another kind of prison. And I don't want to live in prison anymore." Sarah leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "What happens now?" "Now we build something beautiful," David said. "The foundation, our family, our life together. We build something that will outlast us." "And if we fail?" "Then we fail together," David replied. "But we won't fail. We have Emma to keep us honest, and we have each other to keep us brave." Inside the cabin, Emma was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of mountain rescues and happy endings. Outside, her father and the woman who had become her second mother were planning a future that would touch countless lives, save countless families, and prove that love really could move mountains. The wooden bluebird sat on the windowsill, its bright colors catching the moonlight. A symbol of happiness, Emma had said when she gave it to Sarah, but now Sarah understood that it was something more, a symbol of hope, of second chances, of the possibility that even the most broken things could be made whole again. Tomorrow they would begin the real work of building the Mountain Guardian Foundation. There would be lawyers and accountants, grant applications and equipment purchases, training programs and volunteer recruitment. It would be complicated and challenging, and sometimes frustrating. But tonight, sitting under the stars with the man she loved and the child who had taught her what family really meant, Sarah felt a peace she had never known before. She had found her purpose, her place, her people. She had found her way home. The mountains stood silent around them, ancient and eternal, holding their secrets and their promises. And in the small cabin nestled among the pines, three people who had found each other against all odds were building something that would endure long after the snow melted and the seasons changed. Love, Sarah realized, was the ultimate rescue. It pulled you from the darkness, carried you to safety, and gave you the strength to save others. And now, finally, she understood what it meant to be truly saved. 6 months later, the Mountain Guardian Foundation headquarters buzzed with purposeful energy. What had once been an abandoned fire station in Pine Ridge had been transformed into a state-of-the-art training facility, complete with rescue simulation equipment, medical training rooms, and a communication center that coordinated with emergency services across 3 states. Sarah stood in the main training room, watching David demonstrate advanced rope rescue techniques to a group of 20 volunteers. His movements were confident and precise, every gesture reflecting years of hard-won experience. The students hung on his every word, understanding that they were learning from someone who had literally pulled dozens of people back from the brink of death. "Remember," David was saying, adjusting a volunteer's harness, "the person you're rescuing is trusting you with their life. Every knot, every anchor point, every decision you make could mean the difference between them going home to their family or not going home at all." The volunteer, a young woman named Maria who worked as a nurse in town, nodded seriously. "How do you handle the pressure of that responsibility?" David paused, his eyes finding Sarah across the room. "You remember that saving one life creates ripples you can't even imagine. That person goes home to their children, their spouse, their community. They get to celebrate another birthday, see another sunrise, tell their loved ones they matter. That's worth any amount of pressure." Emma, now 9 and taller than she had been during that first encounter, sat at a small desk in the corner doing homework while keeping one eye on the training session. She had become the unofficial mascot of the Mountain Guardian Foundation, her presence a constant reminder of why this work mattered. The volunteers adored her, and she had appointed herself as the official keeper of rescue statistics, maintaining a careful chart of every successful operation. "Dad's team has saved 16 people so far this year," Emma announced to Sarah during a break in the training. "That's more than any other team in the state." Sarah smiled, ruffling the girl's hair. "Your dad is pretty amazing." "You're amazing, too," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Rodriguez says the foundation has helped train over 200 volunteers. That's like having a whole army of heroes." The transformation in Sarah's life had been complete and profound. She had dissolved her consulting firm, liquidated most of her investments, and poured her resources into the foundation. The decision had shocked her former associates and disappointed her mother, but it had given her a sense of purpose she had never experienced in the corporate world. The foundation's impact had exceeded even Sarah's optimistic projections. They had equipped 15 rescue teams with cutting-edge gear, trained volunteers in advanced techniques, and established a rapid response network that had reduced average rescue times by 30%. More importantly, they had created a culture of service that was spreading throughout the mountain communities. "Sarah," David called from across the room, "can you show them the Avalanche beacon demonstration?" Sarah nodded, walking over to the equipment table. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have known an Avalanche beacon from a cell phone. Now she could operate every piece of rescue equipment in the facility and had even participated in several training exercises herself. "The key to Avalanche rescue is speed," Sarah explained to the group, holding up the electronic device. "Every minute counts when someone is buried. These beacons can help us locate victims quickly, but they're only effective if everyone on the mountain knows how to use them properly." As she demonstrated the equipment, Sarah caught David watching her with an expression of quiet pride. Their relationship had deepened alongside their shared mission, built on mutual respect and a common vision of making the world safer for everyone who ventured into the mountains. Maria, the nurse who had asked about pressure, raised her hand. "Ms. Mitchell, what made you decide to leave your business career for this work?" Sarah paused, considering how to explain a transformation that had happened gradually and then all at once. "I learned that there's a difference between being successful and being significant. I was successful at making money, but I wasn't significant in anyone's life. This work, what we're doing here, this makes me significant." The training session wrapped up as the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across the mountains. The volunteers gathered their gear and headed home, each carrying new skills that might one day save a life. Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of meaningful work well done. "Another good group," David said, joining her as they watched the volunteers depart. "Maria's going to be exceptional," Sarah replied. "She has the medical background and the right temperament for high-stress situations." "Speaking of high-stress situations," David said with a grin, "are you ready for tonight?" Sarah felt a flutter of nerves. Tonight was the Foundation's first annual fundraising gala, an event that would bring together donors, volunteers, and community leaders to celebrate their achievements and plan for the future. Sarah had organized countless corporate events, but this felt different. This mattered more. "I think so," she said. "The venue is ready. The catering is confirmed, and we have some incredible stories to share. Including yours," David said softly. Sarah looked at him with surprise. "Mine? You're giving the keynote speech, remember? About transformation and second chances." Sarah had been dreading this moment. Speaking to corporate audiences about profit margins and efficiency metrics had never fazed her, but sharing her personal story felt vulnerably intimate. "What if I can't find the right words?" "You'll find them," David said with quiet confidence. "You always do." That evening, the Pine Ridge Community Center was transformed into an elegant gathering space filled with people whose lives had been touched by the Mountain Guardian Foundation. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at faces that had become familiar over the months, volunteers who had trained in their facility, families who had been reunited because of successful rescues, community leaders who had supported their mission. 6 months ago, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I was a different person living a different life. I measured success by profit margins and market share. I thought I had everything I needed." She paused, finding David and Emma in the audience. Emma was wearing the dress Sarah had bought her for the occasion, and she was beaming with pride. "Then I found myself trapped under an avalanche, facing the very real possibility that I might die alone and forgotten. In that moment, all my achievements felt meaningless. The companies I had helped, the deals I had negotiated, the wealth I had accumulated, none of it mattered when I couldn't breathe, and couldn't move, and couldn't call for help. The audience was completely silent, hanging on her every word. But I didn't die alone and forgotten. I was saved by a man who risked his own life for a complete stranger. David Chen didn't know who I was or what I was worth. He just knew that I needed help, and he provided it without expecting anything in return. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. That rescue taught me something fundamental about human nature. We are not meant to face life's challenges alone. We are meant to help each other, to lift each other up, to be there when someone needs us most. She gestured toward the display boards around the room, filled with photographs and statistics documenting the Foundation's impact. The Mountain Guardian Foundation exists because of that principle. Every volunteer we train, every piece of equipment we provide, every rescue we support is based on the simple idea that every life has value and every person deserves a chance to come home safely. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah wasn't finished. Tonight I want to share some numbers with you. This year, our trained volunteers have participated in 47 rescue operations. They have saved 31 lives, reunited countless families, and reminded us all that heroism isn't about wearing a cape or having superpowers. It's about showing up when someone needs help. Sarah paused, looking directly at David. But the most important rescue that happened this year wasn't recorded in our statistics. It was the rescue of a woman who had lost her way, who had forgotten what it meant to live with purpose. That woman was me, and I was saved not just by one person, but by a community that welcomed me in and showed me what it means to belong. The speech continued for another 10 minutes, but the heart of Sarah's message was clear. Transformation was possible. Second chances were real, and the most important thing anyone could do was to be there for others when they needed help. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories of rescue and recovery. A young father thanked her for training the team that had found his lost son. An elderly woman described how the Foundation's community programs had helped her cope with her husband's death. A teenager spoke about his plans to become a certified rescue volunteer as soon as he turned 18. "You did good tonight," David said, joining her as the last of the guests. "Departed. We did good," Sarah corrected. "All of us together." Emma, who had been helping stack chairs, came running over with her characteristic enthusiasm. "Sarah, guess what? Mrs. Peterson said she wants to donate money to build a new training tower. And Mr. Williams said he's going to start a junior rescue program at the high school." Sarah lifted Emma into a hug, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart. It means we can help even more people," Emma said seriously. "Mom would be proud of Dad for going back to saving people, don't you think?" David's expression grew soft. "I think she would be proud of all of us." As they drove home through the mountain darkness, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The ambitious corporate executive who had been buried under that avalanche would barely recognize the woman she had become. That woman had been isolated, driven by competition and accumulation. This woman was connected, motivated by service and love. "Sarah," Emma said sleepily from the back seat, "are you going to stay with us forever?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She and David had been talking about making their relationship official, but they hadn't discussed it with Emma yet. "Would you like me to?" Sarah asked carefully. "Yes," Emma said without hesitation. "I want you to be my mom for real." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I would love that more than anything." David reached over and squeezed her hand. "So, would one?" 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning with the aspen leaves turning gold, Sarah and David were married in a small ceremony at the cabin where their love story had begun. Emma served as the maid of honor, wearing a dress she had designed herself with help from Sarah's old sketching skills. The guest list was small but meaningful: Foundation volunteers, rescue team members, and the few family members who had supported their unconventional journey. Captain Rodriguez officiated the ceremony, speaking about the mountain traditions of partnership and mutual support. "In these mountains," she said, "we learn that no one survives alone. We depend on each other for safety, for strength, for the courage to face whatever challenges the mountain presents. David and Sarah, you have already proven that you can be partners in the most important work of all, saving lives and building community." As they exchanged vows, Sarah thought about the path that had led her to this moment. The avalanche that had nearly killed her had instead given her everything she had never known she wanted. A purpose that mattered, a family that loved her unconditionally, and a future dedicated to making the world safer for everyone who needed help. "I promise to stand by you through every rescue, every challenge, every moment of doubt," Sarah said, looking into David's eyes. "I promise to help you save lives and to build a legacy that will outlast us both." David's vows were simpler but equally profound. "I promise to love you the way you deserve to be loved, to support your dreams the way you've supported mine, and to build a family with you that honors the memory of those we've lost and protects those we've found." When they kissed, the small gathering erupted in applause. Emma cheered loudest of all, throwing flower petals in the air and declaring that this was the best day ever. The reception was held at the Foundation headquarters, surrounded by the equipment and photos that represented their shared mission. Volunteers shared stories of successful rescues, community leaders spoke about the Foundation's impact, and Emma gave a speech about how happy she was to finally have a complete family again. As the evening wound down, Sarah and David found themselves standing together on the observation deck they had built overlooking the valley. The lights of Pine Ridge twinkled below them, and the mountains rose majestically in every direction. "No regrets?" David asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Only that it took an avalanche to bring us together," Sarah replied, leaning back against his chest. "Maybe that's exactly what needed to happen," David said. "Maybe we both needed to be broken down before we could be built back up into the people we were meant to be." Sarah considered this. "You think we were meant to find each other?" "I think we were meant to save each other," David replied. "And now we get to spend the rest of our lives saving other people together." In the months that followed, the Mountain Guardian Foundation continued to grow and evolve. They established satellite training centers in neighboring states, created scholarships for young people interested in rescue work, and developed innovative programs that combine traditional mountain safety with cutting-edge technology. Sarah's transformation was complete but ongoing. She had learned that personal growth wasn't a destination but a journey, and that the most important thing was to remain open to new possibilities and new ways of serving others. She had found her calling not in spite of her business background, but because of it. Her organizational skills, her ability to see the big picture, and her talent for bringing people together had all been essential to the Foundation's success. Emma thrived in her new family configuration, excelling in school and developing a passion for environmental conservation that complemented her parents' rescue work. She had inherited David's love of the mountains and Sarah's strategic thinking, and she spoke confidently about her plans to become a rescue coordinator herself someday. The Foundation's impact continued to ripple outward. Volunteers who had trained in their programs went on to establish their own rescue teams. Communities that had benefited from their services implemented new safety protocols. Families who had been reunited through successful rescues became advocates for mountain safety and wilderness education. But perhaps the most important impact was the one that couldn't be measured in statistics or documented in reports. The Foundation had created a culture of service that was spreading throughout the mountain communities. People were looking out for each other, helping neighbors, and understanding that individual success meant nothing without collective well-being. On the first anniversary of Sarah's rescue, the three of them hiked to the site where the avalanche had occurred. The mountain had healed itself, showing no signs of the violence that had reshaped Sarah's life. New snow covered the slopes, and the forest was beginning to reclaim the damaged areas. "It's hard to believe it happened here," Sarah said, standing at the edge of the debris field. "The mountain remembers," Emma said with her characteristic wisdom, "but it also forgives," David nodded. "That's what mountains do. They teach us that destruction and creation are part of the same cycle. Sometimes things have to be broken down before they can be built back up stronger." As they stood together in the place where their story had begun, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude. The avalanche had taken away the life she thought she wanted and given her the life she never knew she needed. She had been buried under the weight of snow and ice, but she had been rescued by love and lifted up by purpose. The wooden bluebird that Emma had given her sat on the mantel in their cabin, a reminder of the happiness that could be found in the simplest gifts. But Sarah no longer needed a symbol to remind her of joy. She felt it every day in the work they did, the lives they saved, and the family they had built together. The Mountain Guardian Foundation would continue to grow and evolve, touching more lives and creating more ripples of positive change. But for Sarah, the most important rescue had already been completed. She had been saved from a life of isolation and emptiness, and she had been given the chance to save others in return. As they walked back down the mountain together, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a successful but lonely executive, focused on profit and personal achievement. She had been transformed into a wife, mother, and community leader, dedicated to service and collective well-being. The change hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. But it had been worth every moment of uncertainty, every difficult decision, every step away from the familiar toward something better. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.